Trump's not a conservative. He's an authoritarian narcissist. He's a populist authoritarian narcissist. So historically speaking, all of his tendencies are, basically where narcissism takes him, which is whatever makes him popular, makes him feel good at any given moment.
That is someone who was once not only, of course, the Republicans' choice to enter the White House, but also a very powerful Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan. You can hear what he calls Trump, an authoritarian narcissist. Meanwhile, we have the warnings about how the enabling of not the right wing or the Republican side, that's politics and policy, but the authoritarian side is getting worse and dangerous in America. Now, tonight, as I mentioned, we'd update you on this. The Republican House has moved forward, passing a vote to authorize an impeachment inquiry into President Biden. That is not an impeachment vote, so it's not as big a news item or Washington development as if there were a full impeachment. And it was, you can see here, it was a party line vote. It basically is a symbolic embrace of the ongoing, already open Biden probe. 221 members of Congress on the Republican side voting for that. Mike Johnson, the new speaker, led it. And he has become something of a symbol of this enabling against his own past claims about what he wanted to do with power. And you have to be careful when people who amass more and more power suddenly change what they say they want to do with it and suddenly start going after your rights or selling out the entire government they wanted to lead in order to protect people, or in this case, protect people who want to overthrow democracy itself. Consider these comments surfacing that are now getting scrutiny.
The founding fathers, the founders of this country, warned against single-party impeachments. They said that it would be bitterly divisive, perhaps irreparably divisive for the country.
So the moderates in your caucus would say, why not exercise greater restraint now?
Well, we've shown great restraint. I mean, there are a lot of people who are frustrated that this hasn't moved faster. Those are rushed, sham impeachments.
It writes itself. Now, Mike Johnson wasn't saying that he just has a political view and is super partisan. He's always cast himself and tried to almost exude this sort of more serious founding father energy, that he is not just a partisan. And as he said there, he's so anti-partisan that any single party only impeachment would itself be a sham. That's what he said. Today, I just showed you the vote. They are not impeaching Biden yet, but moving forward on a partisan vote to try to get the I word out more and more. And that doesn't mean that we shouldn't listen to anything Johnson says. Indeed, these individuals who control so much that can affect your life should be held to account, not just speaking on the House floor or posting their tweets and videos. And Mike Johnson used to be willing to come on this program. We would gladly have him back if he's willing to take the questions, because we discussed these very issues in the context of then President Trump's impeachment on the beat. This was 2 days before the Ukraine impeachment vote.
As Professor Turley said, he was our expert witness in the House Judiciary about 2 weeks ago. He said this is the fastest impeachment on the thinnest evidentiary record and the narrowest grounds in the history of impeachments. This has never happened in 243 years, and I don't think there's anything there to show an impeachable offense. I don't think they have direct evidence. And for that reason, I think Donald Trump should be acquitted.
We gave him his time. That was the argument. Important to hear both sides. The problem for him is that, having committed to these statements in public, they are not aging well, given that he is overseeing, and he just got the new speakership. He has some power and leverage here. He could lead, but he is going along with what was initially the minority view inside the Republican Party, that they want to spend the end of this year, the beginning of next year, actually launching an impeachment, when, by the way, we have not heard anyone name what the actual high crime would be. And this is a constitutional process. You have to name a specific one, like bribery, right? A high crime or misdemeanor, and they list some examples. Now, 8 of the 10 House Republicans who voted to impeach Trump after January 6th have left Congress. So again, there are people who had an R next to their name and stood up. Here's how Paul Ryan looks at this.
The only way you're ever really good at this job is if you're willing to lose the job. So I think there's a lot of people who already regret not, getting him out of the way when they could have, like an impeachment. So I think history will be kind to those people who saw what was happening and called it out, even though it was at the expense of their personal well-being.
Really fair point. Paul Ryan is discussing the fact that you have to sometimes take votes that might risk your career. Everyone's heard about Liz Cheney. Whatever you think of many other votes she took, she clearly, knowingly risked her career and then paid the price in order to try to fight against what she calls this authoritarian risk to America. Now, Mike Johnson, of course, defended Trump. He didn't vote to impeach then. He played a lead role, though, in trying to use several measures to overturn the election. One Times article calls him the key architect of that strategy. Or, if you prefer a more of a MAGA voice, here's what Steve Bannon said about Mike Johnson on the day he became Speaker.
Here's the important thing of Johnson. He is part of the Trump era. All he's known is the Trump era. He was one of the intellectual architects of pushing back on the stolen election.
The underlying claim is true. The verbiage is wrong because the election was not stolen, and the conservative Supreme Court and many other courts dismissed those kind of claims. But the underlying point that Bannon is making is they see Johnson as an ally in their efforts at what they call the sweep, what has now been a convicted coup with several different planks, although Donald Trump is presumed innocent and hasn't, of course, faced his coup trial. Johnson is now a part of this. And the other political point Bannon makes is something that sometimes gets forgotten. Liz Cheney and her dad are obviously pre-Trump. A lot of members of Congress, even in the Republican Party, are pre-Trump. Johnson came in 16. So we can't just think of this as one monolith. And the people who came in later and only know Trump as the head of the Republican Party, they've never held a national federal office in any other era, well, they may be more craven than the Paul Ryans. Now, days ago, Johnson said he admitted an anti-police stance. He basically said a version of Blue Lives Don't Matter, and he sides with fugitive thugs over the police. Now, that might be a big scandal. Obviously, it is an extreme statement of any kind. He said it while he walks around guarded by the Capitol Police, who do their jobs regardless of his position. Again, this is the news, and I'm just telling you the bottom line of what he said. He wanted to undermine the police. The Blue Lives didn't matter on January 6th. And he wanted to, he said, publicly interfere and hide evidence in the identity of anyone who attacked police, who battered police, who brutalized police. Extraordinary statement, scandal level. Because he said it, though, in service of the January 6th activities, some of which are convicted sedition, some of which are battery, some of which are still being adjudicated. Because he said it there, it may not have played, at least among conservatives, as an anti-police scandal. If you only support the police when they're doing things that you agree with, and you want police hurt, attacked, or even killed for your political agenda, well, obviously, you've slipped into authoritarianism and you're very anti-police, and maybe all your past discussion of Blue Lives Matter wasn't serious to begin with. Now, watch as Johnson discusses this. I told you we deal with the facts here. I've described the context. What you see on your video, which was playing for you to remember, is this is what those people did. This is one officer who was tragically caught in the doorway. There you see the others pushing on it. They formed a stack formation. They attacked police with any weapons they could get their hands on. These people, some of whom have been convicted, are anti-police thugs. Johnson publicly admitted that he wanted to interfere with the potential release of their identities to prosecutors.
We're going through a methodical process of releasing them as quickly as we can. As you know, we have to blur some of the faces of persons who participated in the events of that day because we don't want them to be retaliated against and to be charged by the DOJ and to have other concerns and problems.
He said they don't want the thugs who attack police to be held to account, to be potentially prosecuted, to be criminally dealt with in our justice system. Outrageous, obviously. Now, we should note as a matter of accuracy in his office that later, in a sign that they knew he'd gone too far even for them, we should note for accuracy the DOJ has those videos. So this isn't an active plot where they're actually clashing with the Speaker of the House. He just took over. Long before his tenure, they'd already gotten all this evidence. But he did say publicly that that's what his goal was, which we should keep in mind if he's ever involved in something in the future. And by the way, if he actually physically did it and the prosecutors didn't have the evidence yet, he could be facing his own potential prosecution for obstruction of justice. The DOJ says they have the unblurred video. So again, that's not the situation tonight. But the stakes are high. The warnings are coming from inside the House, including inside the House of former Republican speakers like Paul Ryan. And they're calling out their own for actively enabling the next authoritarian coup.